Hi everybody, I'm Jack the Rambling Raconteur, and I hope you're warmed up for the Fit for Reading tag. I thought I'd start us out with a fun little picture of yours truly with Bill Rogers, the great United States marathoner and distance runner from the 1970s and early 1980s. And he was out in Phoenix a couple of years ago for the 40th anniversary of the Runner's Den Pancake Run. And it was great. He actually ran part of the race with us, and then afterwards you could go up and talk to him, meet him, and it was just really cool to meet someone who had done so much for fitness in the United States. But this is a really fun tag. It was originally created by Sarah M.G. Reeds, and just very absolutely wonderful humorous sensibility on her channel. Roz at Skelly Dandling about the books did this and tagged any booktubers who are runners, and I think I qualify for that. So let's jump in. Prompt 1, Zumba. Not running. Name a twisty and turny book that was super fun to read. Well, in terms of just really twisting and shifting in the narrative, moving around in really interesting ways, the most recent book that comes to mind is Song of Solomon by Toni Morrison, which is an absolute delight to read and really does keep you moving, and ends on a twist that it earns and deserves. In terms of a short story, more like a twisty mystery, I would say Death in the Compass by Jorge Luis Borges. I think it narrowly edges Garden of Forking Paths as one of his most beautifully written, sort of crime mystery type stories. So just a wonderful, wonderful story. Prompt 2, CrossFit. My brother's a big fan of CrossFit, not so much this guy. What was the most intense book you ever read? It would be any of the narratives in here, the autobiographical slave narratives that are in this book. All of them are truly horrifying. They're intense. They tear at all aspects of humanity, in our minds and in our hearts, just as slavery did. The narrative of Frederick Douglass is one of the most famous, but there are so many others. Prompt 3, Burpees Suck, also known as Up Downs. Name a book you hated. Well, I think that there's a really beautiful and amazing short story nestled within the 700 pages of Anna Karenina, but I will more distinctly say that I find Aristotle one of the most boring writers of all time, and I realize a lot of those are his sort of lecture notes for almost like with grad students delivering his classes, but even in the Organon, I find him quite boring. Prompt, and that's coming from a guy who tells stories to himself and talks to himself as he runs. Aristotle's too much for me. Prompt 4, Intramural Sports, which I love. They are amazing. Particularly when you're in college. I think that's just a great way to continue staying active and sort of staying healthy at a time when you're sort of towards a physical peak but don't even realize it. Prompt 4, Intramural Sports. What book were you assigned to read for school, but you ended up liking it so much you couldn't wait to read it at night? I had to think very long and very hard about this. Nothing was coming to mind. And I've always really enjoyed reading, but I didn't often enjoy the books that were assigned to be read, even up until sort of the end of college. But one that came to mind, and it wasn't this book in particular, but it was this sort of area, was in 3rd or 4th grade. We did a whole unit on ancient Greece and ancient Rome, and part of that involved exploring in our English class the Greek myths. And so I was reading every book I could find on the Greek myths. This is the Robert Graves Penguin Classics Deluxe Edition, which I have now and which I love. I didn't have this as a kid. I had a whole number of other editions that were quite good and really helped ignite just a love and a fascination for those stories. And I enjoy Graves' interpretations, even when I disagree. I often just am fascinated by what he explores in those myths. Prompt 5, running or jogging. Now here's what we're talking about. Or walking, which is where you walk, jog, because you're just so tired. That happens to me sometimes now. Name a book that follows all the standard tropes, but you still enjoyed it. So I grabbed 2. In terms of thinking about more standard tropes of a crime novel, I think one of the best is Skinwalkers by Tony Hillerman. He writes these crime novels that are set in the Navajo Tribal Nation with the Navajo Tribal Police, and in the southwestern United States, and they are absolutely amazing. This is one of my favorites for just a variety of reasons. I think it really accomplishes everything that he does well in that book. Another one would be very different volumes within the Chronicles of Amber by Roger Zelazny. Not so much Nine Princes in Amber, but I think Guns of Avalon, Hand of Oberon, those two in particular probably are quite strong, and yes, they're fantasy novels, you know, but they're short fantasy novels, and they hit all of those sort of heroic and high fantasy tropes, but they just do it with that weird, strange slant that Zelazny is so gifted with. Love it. Prompt 6, Jazzercise. I was thankfully too young for that to be a big thing. Even for the adults I knew. A book you enjoy that is outdated or was published long ago. Well, it wasn't published that long ago, but it's certainly, you know, translations of very old texts, and that would be Pronsa. I did a review of this back in January or February. This was a Christmas gift from my wife last Christmas, and I absolutely loved this book. I've gone back and reread a few of the poems in here, but it's an anthology of troubadour poetry, and so they're just fantastic. I loved this. So not necessarily published long ago, but written long ago. And then prompt 7, trampoline class. Not a fan of trampolines. I don't think they're safe. What book do you absolutely love, but it's underrated? Well, I realized this won a Booker Prize in the 80s, and that this has, you know, been listed on various, you know, top 100 novels lists and such. But Possession, a Romance by A.S. Byatt is probably one of my 3 favorite novels. And the fact that it's not, you know, a top 10 novel for many more people rather than a top 100 novel, just astonishes me. You know, what this book accomplishes in terms of postmodernist writing, in terms of romance writing, in terms of, you know, exploring Victorian society, exploring, you know, the poetic traditions, and being able to create absolutely distinct characters that are an alternate universe version of Robert Browning and Christina Rossetti, and then having them interact with each other in a romance is just astonishing. And this book, again, like Song of Solomon and like some of the others, just earns everything that it sets out to accomplish. It does. You know, it finishes the race, and it finishes the race well. But the other one, the book that almost no one, I don't think I've ever met anybody else who has read this book before I mentioned it to them. And it is just such a strange and beautiful and glorious book, is Days Between Stations by Steve Erickson. And it has just a really strange cover. You can see this like weird desert and this cat, and there's like a high-speed train coming through. And I'm just gonna, let's see if it has it. It doesn't have a review of it. This is set in the future, and it has a couple of different narratives going on, one of which involves a person who is trying to restore a long-lost French silent film, and there's an alternating narrative around that French silent film being created, and at the same time you have, in the future, you know, narrative, we have just this, I don't want to say dystopic world, but an absolutely changed world, and it is strange and beautiful. And it crafts these incredible settings, incredible scenes, and, you know, but also like nails what can be so interesting about those old silent films and those like massive film productions. And it's quite short. It accomplishes all of this in like 250 pages. But it really is a beautiful book. It's daring, haunting, and sensual. Absolutely. So that is the Fit for Reading tag. 8, who do you tag? I don't know. I guess Roz tagged all the booktubers who are runners. I'll tag all the booktubers who aren't runners, because there's plenty of people who aren't runners. And yes, this is what I've looked like most recently, is with my pandemic haircut, as I've been going out running, you know, when there's no one else around. It's a headband over the hair now, which is always sort of a strange state to be, but I hope everybody's having a safe week. Thanks. Bye.